Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are starting in 2 Kings. I would say it is a new book, but in reality it is not. In other words, the original writings of 1st and 2nd Kings, just like 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, were actually one book. No, but each book was one. The translators over time separated the books. Also remember, even the name, the titles in and of itself, they're not necessarily the titles that the books are. So when we say, for example, 1st and 2nd Samuel, that's a title given by the translators. For example, 2nd Samuel actually takes place after the death of the prophet Samuel. So in other words, the titles in the titles of the books, and that's any book, pretty much any book for the most part, in and of itself is not inspired. So the Chronicle of the Kings, and as I said, so we're trekking through. We're trekking through the chart of the kings. Let me pull this up because I actually found another chart that I'm going to that's even better. But these are let's see here. Okay, these are the kings of Israel. Now, in order to understand that, keep in mind when we talk about 1st and 2nd Kings, and then the difference between Kings and then Chronicles. Again, titles not necessarily inspired, but the focus on one. So Kings, as we're charting through, focus primarily on the kings of Israel, the northern tribe. And remember that happened, and if you look at a chart back in Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon. In fact, this chart here goes down. So if you look at Rehoboam, he was the son of Solomon. Because of his foolishness, he divided the nation, and ever since then there have been two kingdoms. If America, this is a sidebar here, if America wanted to learn any lesson from a civil war, since they didn't learn from the first one, because you have people today that are entertaining a civil war, secessions, things like that. A divided nation is never good. So from this time, it was never good. So as far as Israel is concerned, it was just never good. When Rehoboam in his foolishness rejected the wise advice to lighten the load, he scorned the people, and the people left. Now this was also a prophecy given to Jeroboam, and he became he became the first king of the northern tribes, or the divided Israel nation. So the writings of the kings focus primarily on then the kings of Israel, but as we're reading, of course, you see this overlap where it talks about the kings of, it gives you the birth and reign, a little description of the kings of each kings, but the primarily focus, in other words, you look at the storyline, the narrative focus primarily on Israel, the northern tribes. When we get to the Chronicles, okay, it's going to focus mainly on the kings of Judah, and one of the important reasons to understand about that is the bloodline of Jesus is really what is important here, but more on that when we get to the kings of Chronicles. So what we kind of see is this overlapping of the kings. I like this chart because look at the timeline here. So Jeroboam came around 931 BC. So you start with the birth of Christ, right, or Christ. So we are in the year 2022. So that means if you start with the birth of Christ and then you start moving forward, that's how we get to 2,000 years. Well, the timeline here, if you start with the birth of Christ, but you move back, so you there's a 500-year gap between the last book of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But we do have genealogies, and you can see more of those genealogies in, for example, Luke. Okay, but this is the kings here, and so if you can see, as we're right at the death of Ahab, and so as we can see, the death of Ahab is about 874 BC. And so as far as the timeline, I don't know if these timelines are exact, in order. However, this gives us a kind of a good timeline. And that's kind of important because when we come to like the end of the book of Kings and the end of the book of Chronicles end with the Babylonian invasion. And so that's important because, so when you look at, where am I at here? Zedekiah, right? So Zedekiah, let me see here, 27, I'm going to do something right quick, since I'm not that great in math, okay. About 300 years. We're talking about a 300-year period around this time from Rehoboam to the Babylonian exile. I'll get more into that later in a later study because the Babylonian exile changes everything. But by the way, we're on path to this great destruction. Okay, and you can see the difference with the different wickedness of men, the different wickedness of the kings of Israel. All right, so First Kings closes off with the destruction of Ahab. Okay, the destruction of Ahab, and there he is here. Excuse me. Okay, so the destruction of Ahab. So we're going to pick it up with his son, Ahaziah. I'm sorry, Ahaziah. Okay. All right. Again, forgive me for butchering these names. All right. So let's get to first. It says, after the death of Ahab, Moab rebelled against Israel. Ahaziah had fallen through a lattice window of his upper room in Samaria and was injured. So he sent messengers instructing him, go inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron, if I will recover from his injury. Now, this is very interesting. But it also shows you just how corrupt. Now, even though Elisha had defeated the prophets of Baal, wickedness, especially in Israel, on Israel's side, it was just exceedingly wicked. Remember, Jezebel is his mother too. Verse 3, the angel of the Lord said to Elijah the Tishbite, go and meet the messengers of the king of Samaria and ask them, is it because there is no God in Israel that you are going to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Ekron? Therefore, this is what the Lord says. You will not get up from your sick bed. You will certainly die. Then Elijah left. This is by the way, a fascinating story here. Excuse me. The messengers returned to the king, who asked them, "Why have you come back?" They replied, "A man came to meet us and said, 'Go back to the king who sent you and declared to him, this is what the Lord said. It is because there is no God in Israel that you are sending them to inquire of Beelzebub, the god of Akron. Therefore, you would not get up from your sick bed. You would certainly die.'" Now, another thing that's interesting about this, here Ahaziah, he is asking advice from a God that was defeated. Remember, Elijah defeated this God with the showdown, right? And here he's asking advice from the God doesn't exist, but even in his mind, he's asking, why wouldn't he ask for mercy from the God that showed up? Why would he ask mercy from the God that showed up in fire? In other words, they saw that. They were all, if we didn't see it, they certainly heard of it. And what they never, ever, ever saw was Beelzebub showing up in any form. Verse 7, the king asked them, "What sort of man came up to meet you and spoke these words to you?" They replied, "A hairy man with a leather belt around his waist." Now, keep this in mind, because this is also, we're going to see this in the figure of John the Baptist. Remember, some people even thought he was a reincarnation, which he wasn't. But he did kind of was hairy guy with a leather belt. And then he said, "It is Elijah the Tishbite." So the king, Ahaziah, I'm going to try to get this right here. Ahaziah, anyway, sent, so King Ahaziah sent the captain of 50 with his 50 men to Elijah. And when the captain went up to him, he was sitting on top of a hill. He announced, "Man of God, the king declares, come down." Now, what's kind of interesting is how they address him. What's going to be more interesting, of course, is his reply. Verse 10, Elijah responded to the captain of 50, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." And the fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. So the king sent another captain of 50 with his 50 men to Elijah, and he took in the situation and announced, "Man of God, now this is what the king says, come down immediately." Elijah responded, "If I am a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and consume you and your 50 men." So a divine fire came down from heaven and consumed him and his 50 men. Now, at this point here, it is amazing to me that the king is not getting it. So at this point, 100 men, right? 100 men are gone, and they are destroyed by the fire of God. In other words, the prophet demonstrates that he is a prophet, but no one's repenting. That's to me more amazing. The sinful nature of man. That's more amazing. Verse 13. Then the king sent a third captain of 50 men with his 50 men, and the third captain of 50 went up and fell on his knees in front of Elijah and begged him, "Man of God, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your sight." Now, just think about this for a moment. The other two kind of came up and certainly were more arrogant, right? They died. 100 men, right? Maybe more like 102 men if you count the captains, right? This captain here says, "Oh my God, this man had just sent me to my deathbed, but he comes and he asks mercy." Now, I've been saying this throughout our study, that the Old Testament, by foolish people, in my opinion, ignorant people, have given what they call the God of the Old Testament. They have misrepresented him. Now you may go, well, wait a minute, how could this be when fire literally came down from heaven? And that is true, because God judges the wicked. God judges the wicked. But if you always notice, when people humble themselves before God, how God is always merciful. In other words, God is more merciful than he is judgmental. In other words, judging is the last resort. He would much rather have mercy. And so this guy came down and fell and humbled himself, and God had mercy. Verse 14, already fire to come down from heaven and consume the first two captains of 50s with their 50s. But this time let my life be precious in your sight. And the angel of the Lord said to Elijah, go down with him and don't be afraid of him. So he got up and went down with him to the king. And then Elijah said to King Ahaziah, this is what the Lord says, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub and the god of Ekron, is it because there is no God in Israel for you to inquire of his will? You will not get up from this sick bed, and you will certainly die. Now at this point, shouldn't Ahaziah, shouldn't he, having seen that two men, now watch this here, shouldn't he have seen 100 men killed by a demonstration of God's power, and then 50 spared by the mercy of God? Shouldn't he have asked for mercy? And that's the amazing thing, as I said, woven through the entire Bible. We see the sinfulness of man, right? The sinfulness of man. So at this point here, the king deserves the judgment of God, does he not? Verse 17, Ahaziah, I'm so butchering his name. Ahaziah died according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken, and since he had no son, Joram became king in his place. This happened in the second year of Judah's king Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat. And the rest of the events of Ahaziah's reign, along with his accomplishments, are they not written in the historical records of the kings? Very, very interesting thing here. God does these signs and wonders according to his mercy, according to his will, according to his sovereignty. What is interesting is that mercy is never owed anyone, but God always has mercy. And that is interesting. And when you note, like for example with King Saul, remember God said he took his mercy from him. If you think about it, Saul never asked for it. And just remember, even wicked King Ahab humbled himself before God. He humbled himself, and God had mercy on him. All right, guys. So chapter 2 in our next study. Don't forget to like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button. And all comments are welcome, so feel free to give them. See you in the next study.